Hey, Steve Saretsky here, as always, Canadian real estate market update with a particular focus on Vancouver to get any sort of value entertainment out of these videos. All I ask that you hit thumbs up and subscribe. Questions, comments, put those below. Quick bit of housekeeping. The Saretsky report, the free Saretsky report, is now out. 28 pages of my thoughts on the housing market, the economy. There'll be a link to that in the description below. I also want to get your thoughts. I'm debating putting that report behind a subscription paywall in the future. Probably a couple $100 for the year, monthly report, 40-50 pages of Canadian finance, economics, housing, credit. Curious to hear your thoughts if there's any interest in that. Again, this is not a set in stone, but I obviously want to get some feedback. I put out a lot of content for free. It takes me a lot of time and effort, and so that's just, for me, is something that I'm considering. It would also allow me to, I think, beef up the quality of those reports as well. So I want to hear your thoughts. Before I get into this week's video as well, I just want to mention something, and then we're going to talk about it later in the video, but there's actually a hashtag trending right now on Twitter. Hashtag cancel the debt. That's trending in Canada, and I didn't start the trend. I didn't tweet it. So just keep that in your mind as we get through this video. And I know a lot of you have been asking me, what I'm doing in this quarantine, and any recommendations, and what am I doing with my investing, and I don't really want to get into that specifically, but what I can tell you is, like, I'm spending a lot of time right now reading. I think this is a tremendous opportunity to read, to learn, and position yourself financially and strategically for this is the single greatest, largest economic event of our lifetimes. I think it's going to create winners and losers, and I think that now is probably the single most important time that you can kind of get a hold of your finances and learn. And so, I mean, for myself, this week alone, I got first and foremost, you got Jim Grant's Interest Rate Observer, probably one of the most respected writers in the finance space. I've been reading a lot of Howard Marks's free newsletters, free memos. He rarely puts these out. He puts maybe one out a month. But I'm reading a lot of Howard Marks. If he's not a billionaire, he will be shortly. And then I got Kira Sokolov's 13 Ds. This is a $25,000 annual subscription. I didn't pay that. I'm just using the free trial version. But I mean, these guys, between the three of them, are probably three of the most respected people in the finance space. And what I find most fascinating about those three pieces is if you read any of them, you'll probably come out with different conclusions to all of them. But what they all do is they enhance your level of critical thinking. You have to be able to think for yourself. And all three of these guys humbly admit in their writing and in their research that none of them know the actual eventual outcome. They have probabilities and potential scenarios, but nobody can say with certainty that it's going to be, for example, inflation or deflation. And, when the recovery, when are we going to hit bottom, and when does the next bull market start? None of them have those specific answers, but what they do provide is critical thinking, critical analysis that helps put your framework together. I think that's important because I get a lot of feedback from people reading these comments and replying to people, and it seems like everybody's the smartest guru investor here, and then they know what the outcome's going to be. I find it hilarious. Like, I will humbly admit I don't know the outcome, but there are certain things that I do know. There's certain things that we know that should help start to put the picture together for you. So what do we know? We know that 1 million Canadians in March were laid off. This is the single largest monthly movement by a mile. Not even close. Look at this chart. You just destroyed the y-axis forever, indefinitely. And this is only just begun. We just started with the business sort of shutdowns in Canada. Since March 16th, 2.6 million Canadians have filed EI claims. 2.6 million in just the past couple of weeks. So this is going to continue to ramping up. I've had more family members since last week's video being laid off. So this is just going to keep compounding. And so how does that not impact your framework? And it's funny because like you look at the markets right now, and obviously you have this sort of bear market rally that basically I think people are quantifying, well, the virus looks like it's not getting as bad, or it might not be as bad, but I still don't think people are factoring in the insolvency risks. After this virus is quieted down, is gone, we go back to our daily lives will not be the same. They're not going to go back to what it was. It's going to take years to repair the damage that has been done economically. That is 100% the truth. And I have to laugh because I was quoted in a Vancouver Sun article earlier this past week, and in it I basically said, the housing market has basically come to a freeze, and we probably won't really see prices come down for at least probably 6 months, because housing is kind of illiquid, and when there's nothing trading, you're not going to see prices reflected in an MLS benchmark being down by 3, 4, 5, 6%. And I have to laugh because one of the realtors that I follow on Facebook, he posts this and says, "Oh, this is bullshit journalism, what garbage." And then I go through the comment section because somebody tagged me in it. And every realtor on there is going, "Oh crap, this is bullshit, stupid, bad reporting, da 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 da." And it's like, how can you logically look at this? You just had 1 million Canadians laid off. Every business is shut, basically. How can you logically come to the conclusion that the housing market may not be affected? I'm not predicting prices. I'm not going to say that they're going to be down 10% on September the 10th, 2020. What I'm saying is that the probabilities for downside are extremely high. The largest headwind to housing is not interest rates, it's unemployment. And I've said that in my videos for the last 12 months, probably longer than that, because I've said, and my view, again, I don't know the for certain outcome, my view is that interest rates will remain lower for longer. I think we're already at zero, but I think bond yields continue to track closer and closer to that zero bound. I think that we're going down the path of Japan, which has been engaging in quantitative easing basically for the last 15, 20 years. They own the majority of the ETF and bond market. And that's... So, look at this chart between the mortgage arrears rate in Canada and the unemployment rate. So this is just a projection of where the unemployment may go. And it's from HSBC, a respected economist at HSBC. I actually think that his unemployment projections are too low, and I think his recovery projections are probably too optimistic. But again, these are changing on a weekly basis. So even in that scenario, even with mortgage deferrals, you have to remember that even with a mortgage deferral, the interest is still compounding on the back end. So it's going to help some people. It'll help mitigate foreclosures and delinquencies. But it's not going to save everybody. And so I think the wave of insolvency is going to be like nothing that we've ever seen. And if you didn't watch my interview with Scott Terrio, debt consultant over in Toronto, I highly encourage you to go and watch that. I posted that a few days ago. And so we know that the authorities are coming in and doing everything that they possibly can to keep the plumbing in place. So we had the Federal Reserve this past week, the Fed, came out and now declared that they're going to start buying high-yield junk bonds. High-yield junk bonds. So you want to talk about, free markets, and like I said, there's never been any free markets. There's no such thing. And so the Fed, central banks are throwing everything they can at it. The Fed's buying, think about this, the Fed's buying high-yield junk bonds. So these companies that are over-levered, that some of them don't earn a profit, they're losing money, they're buried in debt, they're raising equity, and propping up CEO compensation. And these are basically zombie companies that should have been, under normal circumstances, bankrupt years ago. But because there's a continued desire in a low interest rate environment for yield, that investors are having to basically stimulate or basically invest and prop up these companies because they need that 6% yield in high yield junk because you can't get anything in a government security. So, and now the Fed, when this market is now obviously blowing out because everybody knows the solvency risk is through the roof, because these yields are blowing out, the Fed is saying, oh, well, this is not okay, so we're going to start buying the debt of these junk zombie companies. Now, just imagine how perverse that is, because as long as you're like a large corporation that's quote-unquote too big to fail, you get basically bailed out. But if you're like the mom and pop small business, they don't care about you because like, there's no way for the money to get down to you. So what happens is like the small and medium businesses are basically going to get wiped out, and the larger corporations are basically going to take a larger share of the pie. And so I think this massive consolidation is taking place. So let's give you an example. So what we saw in the United States was you had companies like the Cheesecake Factory. So they go to their commercial landlord and they say, we're not paying rent this month. Come and get it from us. We're not paying. Cheesecake Factory has that ability because they're massive. It's a huge company. It's a huge amount of lease space. Who is this landlord going to replace that with in this environment? Who? Whereas if you go to the small mom and pop company, if you go to the Joe's Pizza place down the road, they don't have that kind of leverage with their landlord. The landlord's going to say, okay, great, get stuffed, get out. And then there's going to be some new other business comes in. So I think there's going to be massive consolidation. I think that the insolvencies are going to rise. And one thing that I will say, because I've talked about this for the last little bit, and this is my personal view, is that this is obviously massively deflationary, despite what the central banks are doing and governments. That I said there's going to be massive deflation. And then I think eventually we're going to get the inflation. So when, I don't know, it could be 6 months, it could be a year, it could be 3 years, it could be 4 years, but it will eventually come. But I think one of the things that I found interesting, and I was reading, again, that 13 Deep piece from Kira Sokolov, where he interviewed a guy named Dr. Lacey Hunt. Lacey Hunt is probably one of the most respected economists there. He runs a big fund, wealthy, smart guy, very respected in the finance space. And he's been dead right for 20 years about deflation. So, after the 2008 financial crisis, when the Fed engaged in QE1, QE2, QE3, Lacey Hunt was coming out and saying, this is deflationary. I don't care. You can keep printing, keep doing your quantitative easing. You're just making the problem worse. And so what he argued again in this piece was the more that the Fed prints, i.e. quantitative easing, you're adding more debt on top of debt. And the more that the Fed intervenes and props up these junk companies, these zombie companies, what you're doing is you're supporting unproductive companies that should go bankrupt, stay in business. They're unproductive. They're not efficient. They're losing money. You're adding to this debt and unproductivity, and it becomes a law of diminishing return. When you have debt as high as it is today, and you add on more debt, you basically have to keep the debt has to continue growing exponentially just to produce a little tiny bit of growth. And so he says that until basically you go basically full MMT style, that's when you'll get runaway inflation. But he says until you keep doing this quantitative easing, which is essentially just creating bank reserves, it doesn't actually necessarily facilitate into real money into people's hands, is the velocity of money will continue to fall. So again, what you're seeing right now, for example, is M2. So M2, this is the money supply, the growth of the money supply. So the Fed is doing quantitative easing. They're creating bank reserves. So the supply of that money is growing, but the velocity is collapsing, and it's been collapsing for 30 some odd years, which means basically the money turnover is collapsing. That's why you don't have inflation, and because of the unproductive debt that you just continue to add on into the system. And so that's my view. I tend to agree with them. I think until you go into outright monetization, i.e. MMT style of sort of money printing, where it basically then becomes kind of unlimited, then that's when I think you switch into rampant inflation. But we're not there yet. I still view this as significant deflation, but that's all I got for this week. Continue to stay safe, stay educated. If this video brought you any sort of value or entertainment, I'll ask that you hit thumbs up. We'll see you next week.